Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Can you hear me okay here? And welcome to those of you online. And it feels very, it feels very encouraging to know there are people participating from all over and online. And so the Buddha used a lot of ordinary concepts, ordinary activities as metaphors for the spiritual practice and teachings that he had. And so, for example, the word that's often translated into English as craving literally means thirst. So thirst was the kind of the metaphor for human craving. The word for grasping is the word for fuel, like the fuel of fire. And somehow, or clinging is the fuel, and somehow like a flame somehow clings to the wood that it's burning. And so the fuel and so there happens to be that both the clinging and the word fuel are synonymous. And so this wonderful idea that clinging is the fuel for more clinging. So another very common idea that the Buddha borrowed to make this metaphor for the psychological life, mental life, is the idea of food. And that we have food that we can feed our mental life. But we have to be careful what food we feed it. Some food is detrimental, gives you indigestion, and some food helps you to thrive. So to be able to know what kind of food that we're taking in, psychologically, mentally, is actually quite helpful. So that's what the topic is today, is the Buddha's teachings on food. And but this is a kind of metaphoric use of the word. And so to start, I want to tell a somewhat famous Japanese Buddhist story that I want to kind of apply in a particular way. So there's a story of some kind of erudite academic scholar who's maybe a great scholar on the philosophy of Buddhism. And he goes to see a Zen master to have a Dharma discussion about things. And so the Zen master will come and have tea. And so they're sitting together, and the Zen master hands the academic an empty cup of tea, and then he grabs a teapot to pour the tea into the cup. And when the cup is full of tea, the Zen master does not stop pouring the tea. And so the tea starts pouring out. And the academic said, stop, the cup is full, can't take any more. And the Zen master then stops and he says, well, in the same way, you're so full of your knowledge that you coming here, there's no room for more. So whether that's fair for the academic or not, I don't know. But certainly it's possible. And I actually came to not a Zen master, but many years ago I came to my Burmese teacher, U Pandita, and I had all these questions. I wanted to get down to the bottom of something, and I probably had a little bit of opinion, so I was trying to move the conversation in a particular way. And at some point he stopped and looked at me and said, Gil, are you here for your own opinions or to learn something? So the food we eat can fill us, but how it fills us is very significant. There's some mental food that we take in that fills us so there's no more room for anything else. And then there's other kinds of food that we take in, psychological food, that actually has the opposite effect. It actually creates more space for more. A feeling of abundance happens when we take in this food. And in that abundance, there's room for all kinds of things. So, for example, if a person is filled with desire for a particular person, maybe it's sexual desire for a particular person, and they say, I really love that person, but really the love is wanting the person more than, I don't know, genuine kind of goodwill or appreciation. And it's possible that that sexual desire is so strong that there's no room for anything else. That's what the person's thinking about and wanting, and if anybody stands in the way, they're hardly noticed, and and someone asks them a question, and they hardly hear the question because they're consumed by this desire. On the other hand, if a person has just a tremendous appreciation for someone and goodwill, that has space for the person to be who they are, then there's also space for other people. The mind is not narrowed and caught up in a particular desire, but rather is taking in a broad appreciation that has an opening feeling. It opens the heart, expands the mind. And so, but both of those are kinds of food. The sexual desire thing can feed more sexual desire. One way that sometimes works is that sometimes desire like that, maybe it comes from a feeling of discontent and maybe loneliness. And paradoxically, pouring yourself into sexual desire at the expense of everything else is a kind of alienation from oneself. And so it kind of adds to the alienation, adds to the dissatisfaction that kind of the desire is supposed to kind of assuage. So the same thing with alcohol, or all kinds of desires that people are addicted to, that they kind of feel something temporarily, but they don't really, they feel something that doesn't let other things in, but it leaves something empty. There's other things that fills us nicely, and but rather than filling us so that there's no space for anything else, it actually makes us more expansive, more wonderfully available and empty. So in the teachings of the Buddha, he talked about these two forces: the food that leads to indigestion, or food that leads to kind of to our detriment, and the food that leads to our betterment, the food that can actually be beneficial to have in this practice. And these two different processes he summarized in a teaching called the 5 Hindrances, and the positive is the 7 factors of awakening. And he would often hold the two together, teach the two together, almost like one is the antidote for the other, or the opposite the other. So he said that the food for sensual desire is obsessing about what's attractive. So somehow looking at what's attractive all the time, that's what we focus on. And so with our media that we have, if you're spending a lot of time looking at media, looking at advertisements for, I don't know what, beautiful cars, then I can imagine that then after a while that there's more and more desire for beautiful cars and you don't notice anything else. I was a little bit kind of surprised at myself. It was very, I thought, indicative of how this food thing can happen unconsciously. So when I first moved to the peninsula here over 33 years ago, I had been given an old Toyota Celica. Some of you know what that was. It was happily red. And but it was, it was 14 years old by the time I got it, and so it was kind of old, and I was very happy and content with it. It was given to me. And so I was driving around, and I would drive around I used to teach in Palo Alto with this group, and so I'd go there for dinner before I taught Monday nights and stuff. And I was happily going along with my somewhat old car. And then, but in Palo Alto back then, even then, there weren't many old cars. There were a lot of new cars. And after doing some years of driving around, it took some years. Maybe the food came in kind of slow. But maybe after about 5 or 6 years of doing this, I started, maybe even more, But I started noticing, so that by the time my car was 20 years old, and I noticed that I started having new car thoughts. You know, it would be nice to have a new car. And before that, I was always, it was kind of any car would do, or, you know, I would have been happy to get a used car. Why buy a new car? But I think I was slowly being influenced by what I saw every day. It was coming in, oh, this is what you do, or to fit into the crowd or something, you should have a new car, something like that. And I was like, wow, look at that, Gil, where did that come from? And that was happening unconsciously. What if I got home and spent, you know, every waking hours, you know, searching for magazines back then, or, you know, the web, and like to look at cars and look at that car, and you know, it could affect someone, especially that desire is kind of feeding and feeding and feeding something. So the Buddha also said, ill will, hostility, is fed by looking at what you're repulsed by. If you're repulsed by something and really feel kind of like off by something, if you then go on the web to really, you know, search for all the instances of things you're repulsed by, you know, what's that going to do to you? That's going to feed something. And so I think that in some ways that happens with politics. People are repulsed by the opposition about how terrible they are, how awful it is. But there's a drive to keep renewing that and studying it and seeing it. And so the hostility then builds and builds and builds. And some of that, you know, it's kind of unconsciously building. It just becomes kind of like, isn't this ordinary? It's normal to be this way. Sloth and torpor, which is not a just being tired or fatigued, is a kind of deep weariness of the mind that's psychological in its root. Resistance, kind of a giving up. Sloth and torpor has food. And sometimes it can be posture. To give in to sloth and torpor posturally, then maybe and you stay home and you just kind of hang out and just watch more and more TV, and something begins to sink, and the energy starts to drain, and there's more of this sloth and torpor. Restlessness, agitation, is the feeding for that is being unsettled, according to the Buddha. The word is unsettled or agitated. And how I've seen this in myself is that if I'm restless or agitated, I'm activated in a certain way. And for me, I get activated kind of upward direction. It kind of goes up into my upper torso, into my head. I'm kind of like, like activated. And so I'm unsettled. And so if I keep focusing on that feeling of agitation, the feeling of, with restlessness, it kind of feeds itself, like something's wrong. And then, oh yes, something is definitely wrong because I feel it's wrong. And then it gets even more wrong. There's something, off. So if I focus on that feeling of agitation, it tends to feed more of its same. Doubt is the same way. That doubt and focusing on what we don't understand, focusing on how we don't understand, can be a little bit of addiction for people because there's an assumption that only by understanding can we be safe or get ahead in life. And so we keep focused noticing how much we don't understand, so we can't be safe, and then doubt kind of spirals. On the other hand, and this is where I think it gets the most interesting, is we can be fed by healthy things, spiritually healthy, dharmically healthy phenomena. And that's what the 7 factors of awakening are. And they don't close us down. They don't fill us in a way so we have no space for something else. But rather they open us so there's much more space. And that's part of the delight of these 7 factors, is it gives a kind of independence to the inner life where there's room and to not be caught. There's a space to not be caught by things we're usually caught by. And so the Buddha said that the food for mindfulness are the are the objects of mindfulness. And that could be any object of mindfulness, but when we see something as an object to be mindful of, then we're establishing a different kind of relationship to it than if we're not mindful. So an example might be that I really want a new car. That's going to be the key to a happy, successful life. And that's what it takes. And so I'm really, zeroed in on this new car thing. So what's the proper object for mindfulness? It's not the cars. Rather, it's the desire I have for the cars. And as soon as I bring clear mindfulness to the desire, then now there's space. There's a kind of, the mindfulness, clear mindfulness has a quality of spaciousness, of a little bit of healthy distance and independence from what we're focusing on. So to have a clear sense of how to and what to have as the object of mindfulness and what mindfulness is, that's different than being absorbed in what I want. It's the desire. Look at that desire. And then specifically for the Buddha, there's 4 general areas where mindfulness can be focused on that's really supportive. And this independence, this freedom, is the body, mindfulness of the body. That's the object. So if I have desire for a car, and I'm really agitated around, I have to have it, then how does that, let's be mindful of how that feels in the body. So it's turning the attention away from the desire, the car, 180 degrees to feel what it's like physically to have that desire, or to have that hate, or to have that restlessness, whatever it might be. And I feel it physically. I feel the agitation. I feel the contraction, the tension that I carry. And to have that wonderful connection of knowing and seeing agitation, tension in the body, but in a mindfulness which is a little bit independent, is spacious, allows it to be there, that gives room for the body to begin to relax. Because the mind is no longer caught up in the desire, it's now involved with the mindfulness of the desire, that part of the physical, and that allows something to relax. To feel the pleasant and unpleasantness of the experience is another object for mindfulness. So I have this desire for the car, and someone says, is that pleasant? Oh yeah, that's so pleasant, those cars are so great. But if I do a 180-degree turn to really feel the direct living experience here, the cars are still pleasant, but my desire is not. The tension around wanting and searching and deciding between the cars, there's a lot of unpleasantness here. And then, wow, I had no idea how unpleasant it is. So anger, hostility can have a certain pleasure to it, but if we really turn deeply and feel what it's like, we see how harmful it is to the person who's hostile. So wait a minute, this is terrible that I'm doing this to myself. And then there's the mind state, to be aware of what is the state of mind that's operating. And again, this is to be aware of I like to call it the quality of your inner life rather than mind state. What's the quality of your inner life when you're desiring a new car and caught up in it? And you feel like the inner desire, the quality of the inner life is not so pristine. It's not so beautiful. It's not so spacious. It's not expansive. It's not a feeling of abundance. It's the opposite. I feel like I lack. I feel that, tight, constricted, wanting. There's no room for things in that space. And then the 4th foundation is to start understanding some of the mental processes at work, understanding the hindrances that are there, understanding the 7 factors of awakening, which is kind of that makes this whole thing then repetitive and repeats itself. So the first of the 7 factors of awakening is mindfulness, and that's when the object of mindfulness support more mindfulness, because it's satisfying to have this kind of wonderful attention that's not locked in, it's not caught. As that attention is there, there's what's usually called investigation, And but what it literally means is the process of the mind making healthy distinctions. And so, if if you're able to see all this carefully, then you can make the distinction. Oh, this activity, wanting to have a new car in such an addicted way, that's very different than being mindful of the desire. Seeing that distinction is really helpful, because then there's a chance for you to choose the one that feels better for you. If you don't see that distinction, then you might as well continue thinking about the car. So being able to distinguish options in the present moment. Oh, this opens me up, this closes me down. This has an ouch in it, this has an ah in it, this feels good. To be able to make these very simple distinctions, and then to choose which distinction, encourages more of making these distinctions. Mindfulness sees it more and more. We become experts, we become skilled at seeing what is harmful and what is not, what is wholesome and what is not. And this in Buddhism is considered to be an invaluable skill to develop, to really tune into the moment and have the agency to see and have the agency over what is wholesome and unwholesome, what gives indigestion and what kind of creates some health for you. And it isn't like a lot of analysis that is involved. It's a product of having this clear mindfulness of the moment. The mindfulness reveals kind of, oh, that's tense. This is not tense. This feels kind of supportive. This doesn't feel supportive. With that agency, with that seeing, then there's the third factor of awakening, which is engagement, energy. This is where agency comes into play. And this is where we see, oh, I think I'm going to choose the mindfulness over preoccupation with a car. There is a choice involved. I'm going to engage over here. And having that choice supports more choices. Supporting a choice that brings energy, that brings engagement, that brings a kind of, oh, this feels good. If we keep making choices that make us feel bad, then it kind of spiral down and become lethargic and become discouraged and all kinds of things. So there is something very important in psychologically for us, that we feed ourselves with good choices. And that can be on a macro level, but it's also this micro level of the mind. And it can be as simple as choosing to be mindful. Oh, it feels much better to be mindful of this than the alternative. That it leads to the fourth factor of awakening, which is joy. And that as we learn to make choices to go towards the wholesome, moment by moment, this is good, this feels good, be mindful here, this feels good. It's kind of like this yes begins appearing. Yes, yes, it feels good, yes, here, yes, yes. We see the difference between a wholesome and unwholesome. That, oh yes, that's so great to see this difference. Yes. Choose the wholesome, oh yeah, that feels nice. And so the joy is this kind of quality of yes. And that yes, that recognizing what's joyful is a food for more joy. The next factor of awakening is tranquility. With enough joy, something inside of us can begin to settle. And here the Buddha said, the food for tranquility is more tranquility. And how I understand that, I've come to appreciate this, is that if you feel like tranquility is useful, it's a nice thing, notice the tranquility that's already here. Can you find inside of yourself some reference point for tranquility? I could be inflamed around what kind of car to buy, the new car that I'm supposed to get. And then a friend of mine says, Gil, you don't have much tranquility. Tranquility might be nice for you, and I don't know anything about tranquility. And the person, my friend, says, "Oh, just look out the window. It's a beautiful spring day out there. Look out, look at the street. It's so calm and peaceful." And I look, oh, look at that. Yeah, it is tranquil. In fact, my butt on the couch feels tranquil. And then slowly, my friend turns on tranquil music. And then something inside of me settles. Tranquility is the food for more tranquility. If we stay in restless, agitated mode, that's the food for more restlessness and agitation. So this shift. And that's also where this second factor of awakening, this ability to distinguish, this is the path towards being restless, this is a path to being a little more tranquil, is so useful. Yes to that. The next factor of awakening is samadhi, concentration. And here the food for this deeper concentration, unification of mind, deeper meditative states and all that, is something the Buddha calls the evidence, the sign, the evidence for concentration, the evidence for being concentrated or settled or unified. As people develop concentration in meditation, there are symptoms of those concentrated states that appear. Some of those are physical. Something begins shifting and changing in the body. The body feels more unified. There might be a kind of nice feeling of tranquility, a glow, a warmth. The breathing can start, for some people, can start feeling quite beautiful. They're like, oh, this breathing is so great. It feels like a beautiful feeling. Sometimes there's tingling that begins happening in the body. Some people see white light that they might see. These are all symptoms of the mind getting calm and settled and concentrated. As we take in the symptoms of concentration, they become the food for more concentration. To recognize the very things that are happening as we get concentrated is a support for letting the mind getting interested or focused or gathered together around these good things that are happening, so it gets more and more settled, more and more focused. And then the seventh factor of awakening is equanimity. And here, like with tranquility, equanimity is a food for equanimity. So if you have no equanimity, then good luck. But if you have some equanimity, and remember, this is the 7 factors of awakening, so it comes on it follows these first 7. So they kind of build on each other, starting with mindfulness. So you might not have equanimity at first, but as you keep practicing, it starts to come. But when it comes, pay attention to it. Take it in. Let it register. Because the equanimity is the food for equanimity. So one of the things that I think is quite marvelous about this kind of teaching is you don't have to understand the cause of your suffering. You don't have to analyze yourself to no end. You don't necessarily have to fix the other people in your household or in the world around you, that they have to become better so you can be good. It's all about turning in and being fed and supportive by something that's available in making these simple distinctions here for yourself, in your own psychology and your own mental engagement with the world. And it begins by making the distinction between being mindful and not mindful. And as we learn to be more and more mindful, we start seeing that distinction. And it makes a world of difference to really recognize it, to know when you're mindful and when you're kind of like just absorbed and lost in the experience. It can make a huge difference. The other day, every once in a while I have something I think of as a little bit like a headache, a migraine. And it wasn't so bad last time. But I started feeling I feel strange in my stomach, and I get really hungry, but I'm full, and I get this headache, and it's kind of a drag. But I've learned to be mindful of it. And there's a way of being mindful is I feel like I'm not identified with it. It's not like, it's almost like it's not me, but it is me. I'm not like pretending it's not. But when I'm mindful, it's like this independence, there's space. It's almost as if who I am is the mindfulness, not these difficult feelings. If I'm not mindful, I could feel a few days ago, I could feel that sometimes almost like my identity sunk into those feelings, like that's who I was. And there was a world of difference between that's who I am versus this is what I'm mindful of. And it just felt, so much easier to go through life this way, to just, I'm mindful of this. Okay, this is what's happening, and I'm not identified, I'm not lost or absorbed in it, but there's this place of freedom or independence that's there at the same time. That's not denying it. I don't feel like I'm aloof, I don't feel like I'm distant, I don't think I'm denying anything. It's just like, this is real. This is more real than this identification thing. So to be able to make this distinction between being mindful and not mindful, that's the food for the other 6 vectors of awakening. They grow and develop, and as they receive them, then appreciate them. And then there's so much more room, so much more space, so much more freedom in the mind. And it turns out that just a few, you have to decide how many, of the problems you have in your life somehow, in a funny kind of way, get solved if you change your state of your mind into a mind that's mindful, sees clearly, is engaged nicely, has joy, has tranquility, is deeply settled, and has a degree of equanimity. These are states of abundance. These are states that are treasures. And so the reference point for what needs to happen changes for us. And it turns out, now it's hard to believe, that Gil's happiness is not dependent on the car. It just turns out that's, who would have imagined? So food, what do you feed yourself with? What do you do all the time? The food for the hindrances is very much tied to what we're thinking about all the time. And so you almost might want to think that the food for these hindrances, for what gives you indigestion, has to do with thinking about cars all the time, thinking about hate, thinking about the doubt, about how terrible things are. There's something about watching the mind ruminate and spin out. You can feel how it's not good food for the heart, not good food for the mind. You can feel how it's so, and there's a tremendous amount of psychological distress in our society comes from how people are constantly thinking, and thinking the same thing, negative thing over and over again. It's just debilitating. It's a kind of food. And it is possible to change the diet. And that's what Buddhist practice is about, changing the diet so it's a healthy diet. Of the input that we take into the heart, the mind, is something much more beneficial. And for the Buddha, I think, it begins by being mindful. It's such a powerful thing to learn. And it's not something you learn just overnight, like, mindfulness is something you keep learning and growing in the years and decades you do it. It's a fantastic thing that just kind of discovering, that's what it is. Oh, okay, wonderful. So I hope that this week you make a resolution to eat better. And that you find this teaching applicable, that you might want to experiment and take a deeper look at yourself. And chances are that if you don't do that, if you don't use this kind of teaching to take a deeper look at what you're doing, chances are pretty high that you'll be on a diet that's not healthy for you. the more we're preoccupied and lost in our thoughts, lost in our it's usually not healthy. To be unpreoccupied, chances are then you have space for these beautiful qualities of heart that Buddhism cherishes. So may you eat well. So we have a few minutes, and if some of you would like to ask any questions about this, you're welcome to ask, or comments, or if you have any experiences having a good diet. Maybe we have some testimonials.
Thank you, Martha. Can people hear me with the mask on? Okay. Trying to frame the question. It completely resonates, everything you've said. My difficulty, I will be fully transparent, I have 2 children, and both of them are suffering because of a family situation that has unfolded post-COVID through no faults of their own. And so I see my oldest in particular, who's 17 and awakening to the world, suffering quite greatly because of factors that are beyond her own control. And I understand that my suffering is because of her suffering, and I don't know how to help her to see how she spins on the doubt and the things that she cannot control that are causing genuine suffering through no fault of her own. And so that causes me great suffering, and I'm unable to skillfully understand how to support, navigate, how to feel equanimity, how to reach a state of equanimity when someone I love so much is suffering.
That's a very important question, and it probably has so many different factors that any answer I'll give you or response I give you is maybe kind of too narrow, or might miss you even. But here are some ideas. Is that some of your suffering, some of your pain, let's use the word pain rather than suffering, some of your pain is completely appropriate for a parent to have for a distressed child. Of course, what parent wouldn't be? Some of the pain is more to do with you than with your child. And so this idea of turning your attention 180 degrees back to yourself, so you can be distinguishing between the pain, the parental pain that's, of course, is going to be there, and the parental pain which is debilitating for you. The first, I'd like to suggest, can actually be energizing in a good way. The second undermines you, gets in the way. And so one of the interesting kind of things to think about, maybe as a reference point, as a not a judgment or a conclusion about yourself, but as a way of seeing yourself better, is try the assumption that the extra suffering that you have is from a lack of confidence. And just that might kind of like, well, why am I lacking confidence? What's that about? Could it be? And so I don't have an answer, but that's you might to explore that. And exactly, but the one of the principles that I kind of live by, especially with children, they really need to feel the care, the love, and the acceptance of a parent who's present. Not necessarily a parent who can fix their problems, but a parent who really is there and understands, and accompanies them with it in a healthy way. And if a parent's trying too much to fix, sometimes that's appropriate for a parent to do that, to get the Band-Aid out and put it on the cut. But sometimes the very movement of fixing, if we're so reactive ourselves and have all this extra suffering, we're actually modeling a way of being in the world that teaches kids to be distressed. But if we can model being calm, being caring, but being untroubled by how they are, I think that then they start getting sense of something, there's another possibility in the world. And so certainly your daughter needs you. So anyway, so those are kind of my preliminary thoughts. I don't know if they give you enough to reflect on.
It does, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really empathize with what she said. I suffer from the same thing, over and over again. In my case, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm overly oversynthesized to the suffering of my offspring. She's a very, very hard-charging, hard-driving individual, and she's pregnant, and she's also getting a degree at the same time she's raising an infant. She's got all these plates in the air, and my wife and I have distinctly different approach to how we observe her. Mine causes a lot of suffering. Hers, by all appearances, doesn't seem to. And that has to do with the fact that I'm constantly tuned into everything she does. And if I can just learn to step away from it and just calm down, the very first step is to be less sensitive or sensitized to what's going on. I'm hoping that then the second step is all these things wonderful things that you describe come to play. Mm-hmm. But I won't allow it to happen because I'm so constantly tuned into everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. So I've got to detune myself first before I can more or less get into that state of calm and equanimity, or whatever you want to call it.
So if hopefully you allow me to give you a carrot. Yeah. So that there's that. If you could stop being so overly concerned with your daughter and thinking about her, staying in touch with her, finding out what's going on all the time, and just constantly kind of being with her challenges, if you could stop doing that and calm down in a deep way and really take a vacation from that, whether it's a few hours or a few days or just long enough, then when you're with her, when you're in contact with her, you probably bring much more benefit to that relationship. So when you're not with her, you're preparing yourself to be with her in her suffering. If you're not with her, don't bother suffering so much. Let it be in the background, because you have something much more important to do so you can be a good father, a helpful father. That's the carrot. So maybe one more?
Hi. Can people hear me? Yeah. I really enjoyed your talk, Gil. I have something a little less meaningful and deep than the other two questions. I was just protesting some parts of your speech because sometimes the compulsion or the attachment isn't really rational. So, for instance, if I see a plate of French fries and I have this deep craving for it, or something I really want to buy, then I could think, well, just investigate the desire, let go of the attachment, but I really, really want it too. So there's some kind of compulsiveness there. I'll probably just reach out and have the rest of the fries. So I just was wondering about the irrational parts of it, or the compulsion, the kind of holding on really tight.
Yeah, well, that's the way people are sometimes. And so classically in Buddhism, one of the most important practices that are the entry-level practice to really get started so you can really do everything else. And I don't, entry level doesn't mean that it's like remedial. It just means it's so important. It's like, that's what I'm emphasizing, how important it is classically. But we don't teach much in the West. And that is restraint. So look for opportunities where this compulsion operates and practice some kind of wise restraint. I don't know about French fries, because they're going to get stale if you don't eat them right away. But the shopping thing, make a commitment to yourself maybe that whenever you feel compulsion to buy something, you always wait a day. And that's the restraint part. And then the next day, maybe it all changes and your view of it changes. But to practice restraint, and don't order French fries. And so with your compulsions that are irrational, you can't go back and look at the cause or why it's working. It's just too hard. But by practicing restraint, you cultivate something strong in you. And that becomes stronger and stronger, that hopefully you find delight and joy in having that kind of autonomy. Look, there's a compulsion, and I'm not going to do anything. Isn't that great? How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Great. So thank you all very much for being here and participating. And I don't know if it's not raining and just cloudy. I'm happy to meet. Is there? We have a drama rock. Yeah, but in here. But is it raining outside? Because some of you, it's nice to meet with some of you. Some of you like doing that, and I like it, in the parking lot. So if it's not raining, I think there was supposed to be a little gap today. I have a question whether will that disrupt the drama? It's sprinkling? Okay, well, let's not do it then. So, and then we have here in I don't know, in 15 minutes or so, we have Dharma Rocks for the children's program here. So if you want to talk, hopefully you can do it out on the deck or something and not linger here too much. They want to set up. And yes? I also put out the food. Oh, so we had our first kind of, I don't know, call it social event, kind of special event, a celebratory event here for someone on Friday, and there was a lot of food, and it was catered. So it'd be great if some of you are hungry or would like to take it home or something. I think maybe it's out in the kitchen or on the counter there, so please help yourself. No French fries. No French fries. Thank you.